Someone told me to post this here, so... Lately I've been having dreams of a girl with pale skin, black hair, either a censored face or fully black eyes, and she wears an 1800s little girl dress. Lately, she's been accompanied by a tall, skinny man. No talking, just breathing with his eyes wide open, with ripped and dirty clothes. She's always in my dreams, and she looks to be around 8 or 10 years old. She helps me in my dreams to enter and exit places, and she's like my friend. She doesn't talk, but she always whispers goodbye to me right before I wake up. I hear her whistle at night, usually around 3:55 a.m. My parents told me no one passed away in our house, but I'm not sure if that. Stuff will fall off of the shelves, even if they weren't close to the edge. Doors will close when we don't look, and something is always touching my head like a mother. I feel a presence is staring at me when I wake up at or around 3 a.m. Not a bad presence, but a presence of a little kid, or sometimes the presence of a mother. I am haunted. Maybe. Am I overreacting over dreams? Possibly. Is my house haunted? Maybe not. But I feel that same little girl in every single one of my dreams is not just a coincidence. Also the man, which I think is the girl's father, whispered something instead of breathing heavily. He said, "Keep quiet." Which is why I didn't go into description about him or the dreams he's in. Entity asked to be followed after visiting during sleep paralysis. I went to bed at 9 p.m. last night, about 2 to 3 hours early for me. Since I'd missed a bunch of sleep the night before and wanted to recover some of the lost sleep, I woke up at 1:30 a.m. and went to the bathroom. At this point, nothing was out of the ordinary. I returned to my bed and fell asleep. This is where the story becomes paranormal. I didn't quite feel like I was fully awake, but was conscious again. It felt similar to sleep paralysis that I've experienced before, but not the exact same, since I felt much more aware of being awake and conscious this time. I felt a presence right outside of my home in my driveway. For reference, I live in a 2-story home, and my bedroom is on the 2nd floor, street side, right above the main door. And it began approaching. The more it approached, the more I began slightly shivering. I clearly heard the top lock of my front door slide and click open, although the door itself made no sound of being opened. It was as if the entity I sensed was making sure I knew it was not a human intruder. I felt it continue to approach and climb the stairs until it was outside my closed door and I could hear the floorboards creaking. Perhaps a creak every few seconds. Far more than normal. It went into the bathroom right next to my room, and I heard the bathroom fan turn on. At this point, I could feel the presence was immensely strong, and I was shivering more and more. I felt the presence enter my room through the door and began approaching my bed, till it was right beside my bed with my back facing towards it. I sleep with 4 pillows, and I felt and heard it take the pillow behind me and gently toss it against the wall I was facing. The pillow slid slowly, gently down the wall, almost as if the entity possessed the pillow. I could feel the presence around my head as this happened, so strong that I couldn't move anything and my jaw went slack. My shivering became an intense vibrating and shaking. I could feel reverberating so strongly within my skull, like the crescendo of the experience itself. Next, I felt the presence exit my room, and I could tell I was no longer under any sort of sleep paralysis, and I could move freely. The bathroom fan was also no longer on, though I couldn't tell at which point it had been turned off. I still felt the presence waiting in the hall outside my door, and I had a very strong impression that it wanted me to follow it, to show me something. I was torn between being curious and fear. I didn't move for a few moments, but somehow felt as if this presence wasn't malicious, so my nerves settled a bit. I continued to hear the floorboards creaking a lot in the hall and grabbed my phone. It was 3:45 a.m. when I checked. After a few minutes, the presence continued to wait. So I said out loud, "I know you want me to follow you, but I'm too scared." Holy fuck. I got an immediate notification on my iPhone telling me to close my move ring for the day. Started shaking more intensely again, but not near the level of the crescendo. I stayed put and began writing all of this down in the Notes app, while the presence continued to wait. It gradually started to fade, and by 4:05 a.m., I was no longer certain whether or not it was there. I texted my family group chat at 4:11 a.m., saying that I had just had intense sleep paralysis. My mom instantly texted back, asking me if I was okay. She told me later that she had just woken up a few minutes prior. She came to my room, we spoke, and I explained my experience to her. But that was all the paranormal activity for the night. Additional context. I had a lot of sleep paralysis as a kid, mostly around the age of 8 to 12. This was a recurring malicious entity that would come into my home uninvited and instill fear in me. I eventually became braver and even furious at the entity, and would immediately try to run at it full force, attack it, and cast it out whenever it visited. This decreased the frequency of the dream until it only happened maybe once or twice ever again. I felt a loving entity once before, in a church as a child, a similar feeling of presence, except this was so immensely full of love, hope, and positive emotion. Nothing like I've ever felt before or since. I believe it was the Holy Spirit. Maybe an angel, but I know angels were often described as frightening in the Bible. My brother saw a ghost in our friend's house, located in the countryside as a kid. He believed in the paranormal ever since this. On my mom's side, she and all of her siblings had lots of sleep paralysis as children. She also woke up screaming after feeling a cold hand touch her while sleeping when her siblings were playing with a Ouija, and the Ouija said, "Touch Anan's mom." She has felt a few presences during sleep paralysis. Come in our house in the past several years, but she commanded them to leave in Jesus' name, and has not had such a dream in a while. Some people on my mother's side of the family were tortured spiritually. I won't get into details, but some of it is pretty dark and abusive. I've heard of these sorts of things can be generational. My father had never experienced sleep paralysis, but had one spiritual encounter in his life. She could really see him. We've all heard that children and animals can see things that we can't. They're more sensitive to the paranormal or the supernatural side of things. I didn't really believe this at first, until my own kids were born. They've all had their own experiences, but this one is about my youngest daughter. I will call her Bella. My father-in-law was one of those people who begged for grandchildren. Every family get-together, it was always, "When you are all going to give me grandbabies." Well, it happened, and he was a phenomenal grandfather. He was never too tired to play, no mess was too big, and he never said no. But life happened, and sadly he passed from a heart attack. My girls were 2 years old, and Bella was just 8 months old. It shattered us, even me, because he'd been in my life since I was 14. He was a second dad to me. It hit my 2-year-old pretty hard, but Bella, I thought was too young to understand, obviously. Fast forward to Bella being a little over a year old. Every time I'd hold her, she'd look off into corners, walls, where nothing was, and smile, wave. I just thought she was being a baby doing weird things, but then she learned to talk. This was where it gets eerie. I'd hear her talking to herself when her sister would be nowhere. I listened one day and heard, "I know you miss Rowdy Pawpaw, but Nana's taking care of him." Rowdy was his pet Shih Tzu. I walked in to ask her who she was talking to. She replied, "Pawpaw Troy. He misses Rowdy. Oh, and he said, tell Nana, happy anniversary." I knew she was trying to say anniversary, but her anniversary was the next day. My mouth dropped. She didn't know that. She was too little. Over the years, Bella would talk about him working in the coal mines, the machines he worked on, his friends and their families. Things she was not told about. Then another big incident where we were all freaked out. He wore a set of dog tags that he never took off. When my mother-in-law boxed up all of his stuff, she misplaced them. She was so distraught over it. She babysat my girls one day and called me crying. "Bella found his tags." I was so confused. She explained that she was walking my girls around outside, and her wedding rings on her finger started to feel like it was burning or tingling. She ignored this, but Bella said, "Pawpaw is trying to tell you his tags fell into the vent in your bedroom." There were even times when she was talking to him when you could smell his cologne, almost hear him. She went inside to look, and there they were. Bella is 6 now, barely remembers these things, but I think it's obvious that she could see her pawpaw. Shadow Man experience. I've come here because the people in my life who I've told either think I'm crazy, don't want to hear it, or are just skeptical. I can't say I blame them. Even for believers, it's hard to believe. But I promise that these events are true and my genuine experience. This happened about 2 years ago. I feel now like I have to talk about it, maybe from the trauma of what I experienced or something. It was just so much. This experience truly begins after my mom had passed. I was truly depressed. I had been depressed before, but this was rock bottom depression, like do or die type of depression. It was rough. I realized something wasn't quite right with me though. Everyone else was recovering from their grief and I wasn't. If anything, I was getting worse. So I did what any normal person would do. I Googled it. I surprisingly ended up on a page about spirits and how they attach to you, and they'll bring your mood down. I was intrigued. I actually found a prayer to cast anything off of me. I'll admit I was skeptical, but I decided, why not? It couldn't do any harm. So I said the prayer, and I felt an entire truckload of suffocating weight lift from my shoulders. Instantly, I didn't feel depressed anymore. I thought that was the end of that. I was so very wrong. It started off with me seeing something dark bolt by in the corner of my vision, then a silhouette of a shadow man on my door and by my bedside at night. I was too old to be afraid of the dark, I told myself. Naive. It came to a peak when I woke up from a bad dream one night and saw this thing creeping up the wall toward my ceiling from the front of the window, filling me with an intense feeling of dread. I immediately turned on my TV light. I was safe, right? Wrong again. Next thing I know, I was energetically knocked out. All I could see was white. I had a kind of vision or dream. It reminded me of my mom's death, which was ruled as a suicide. This vision made me rethink it. Maybe my family was right to believe it was a murder. When I came to, I realized this thing was choking me, like full on, had slight marks around my neck in the morning choking me. Then it disappeared. In the morning, I did the only logical thing I could do. I packed my bags and stayed at a friend's house for a week. That was the best decision I've ever made. I got into healing crystal bracelets and how to use them for protection. Energetically, I felt refreshed. So I returned home. The first thing I saw upon entering my room was a white and black orb fighting each other. The bracelets were a game changer, though. It seems like the Shadow Man couldn't get me as long as I wore them. I also adopted the habit of sleeping with the Bible. I started regularly saying prayers to cleanse my room and self, but every time I kicked it out, it would come back a few months later, really angry. I have to say, I slipped up a few times, didn't wear my bracelets, and got attacked. I woke up from nightmares and had scratches on my back. It followed me to a friend's house and attacked me right in front of them. But it all ended one specific night. It had returned and I saw it again, in full this time. A black shadow figure with bright glowing yellow eyes. It tried to attack me as I laid with my bracelets on the Bible against my chest. When it did, I had a vision of pages from the Bible flipping in my mind. Then it was over for good. I actually recall some verses after and Googled them. They were accurate. I'd left some details out. I just didn't know how to add them. This was an entire year-long experience. I saw the ghost of my mom about a month after she died. Or I've wondered if it was just the Shadow Man was playing a trick on me. She was dressed in very old-timey clothes, but the spirit was black with gray mist around her. It also wasn't rare to hear something knock on my dresser 3 times before and after this. I'll be honest, I probably need therapy just from this experience. I can't exactly do that though, considering the nature of it. I think I just needed to vent. While I'm okay now and everything is great, this experience still deeply bothers me looking back. I think it was just the fact that I never feel safe. Now that I know for sure what's out there, it's hard to really ever feel safe anywhere in the dark again. I did end up moving out of that house and haven't really had any more trouble since. Is there a way to see him for more than a moment? I never thought I'd believe in ghosts or anything. My mom always said ghosts were just someone desperate for something, which may be why I saw him at all. The love of my life passed away a little over 2 months ago now. He battled cancer. lost. I guess. But it never seemed that way because he was so strong in all of it. I would write endless paragraphs about him, but weirdly, this isn't about him anymore. This past week has been really weird, I guess. I was in our bathroom in front of the sink brushing my teeth, and for just a short moment, I saw him in the reflection standing beside me. Not as he was at the end, sick, but as he was when he was healthy. It barely lasted, and before I could even register what it was gone. I know it sounds like utter bullshit, but if I'm being honest, it didn't scare me. It felt like a kick to the gut, a reminder of what was gone, but not frightening. Over the past few days, there's been a few other occurrences. One, I was sleeping and I heard a voice in my head telling me to call my mom. I'm 23, I don't do it often, but the voice eventually woke me up and I ended up calling her out of nowhere. She was in a state of panic because her brother, my uncle, was in a drunk driving accident which killed him, and she just received the news when I called. Fucking chilling that I woke up to that. It's probably a coincidental timing and nothing more, but that doesn't stop it from being fucking weird. I did what I could to help her, but I'm just a husk of grief myself. 2 days ago, I went to therapy because I'm grieving my ex-fiance, but I'm not crazy or anything. On my way home from the appointment, I was driving in my car and the radio connected to something, I'm not sure what, and started playing one of his favorite songs. I don't have it on my phone. There was no reason for it to play, but it did. I pulled over to cry. I miss him so fucking much. And I know it's crazy to say, but these little moments I feel touched by him are the greatest in my life now. If there's a way to make them more frequent, or even better, a way to see him and communicate with him. I know asking to communicate with the dead can be dangerous or whatever, but I have nothing to lose. Barely any family, no friends. All I lived for is gone. But if there's a way to see him or talk to him again, I want to know. I want my baby boy back to me. If you know anything that would help, please share. If not, please don't make fun of me. I know I seem crazy latching on to the tiniest signs, but if you lost the only thing you lived for, you'd find yourself doing the exact same. We share our passion. I like being the member of this sub. I'm very interested in paranormal stuffs and love to hear your stories. Would like to live close to such people like you and encounter something together. My sister, years ago, was sitting on a sofa in my living room at evening. Everyone was sleeping. She next day tells us how, as she was sitting there and watching TV, heard closed doors, footsteps of a small kid in the entrance room. She hears those footsteps coming towards her, but stopping in front, and closes the door, and later walking up the stairs in the entrance room and walking down. It later stopped, but my sister was crying as she had to go through the entrance room to her bedroom, and she was praying. We had a small fridge in the entrance room, sometimes making sound, like someone was walking while working, but she said no. She said she heard child's footsteps. Months after this, my grandmother died at this house because of cancer, and she had daughters many years ago who died by the accident, as she was only a few months old. 3 years ago, maybe, I knew someone whose mother was dead. He showed me a photo on the phone as he was, at night alone, walking outside the city and standing close to the building with glass doors. At some point, those doors cracked a bit suddenly. He took a photo later. When he was looking at the photo, he saw some strange, dark figure in those glass doors as reflection of some body similar to his mother, as he claimed. I don't have any contact with them, but I regret I haven't somehow hijacked this photo. But it would be maybe disrespectful towards him, and wasn't courageous enough to ask him to send me that photo. The Haunting at the Brewery. It's not super elaborate or flashy, but it actually happened. I'd love to hear your thoughts about it. About a decade back, I used to work at a brewery, or a pub. It was set in a pretty big and old building from the early 1900s. I worked there for a couple of years, and most of the time it was pretty chill, but backbreaking at other times. On my time working there, I had two experiences that I can only describe as supernatural. The first one, it was a particular late night, and I was tasked with closing up and hanging and loading docks. Closing it up was making sure there was anything obstructing where the trucks would park, stacked up, loose crates, turning off the lights, locking it all up. I was about done, so I turned off the lights, and as I'm making my way to the door, a beer bottle comes rolling toward me from the dark between the tall stacks of crates. It wasn't forceful or anything. It looked like something gently placed it on the floor and rolled it toward me. I didn't think much of it, so I picked up the bottle and placed it inside a half-empty crate. I turned around, and as I started walking, another bottle comes rolling from the same place, then another one. Tired and thinking it was a coworker trying to fuck with me, I shout, "Hey! All right, you got me. Come on, I gotta close it up." I expected to hear some kind of laughter or something. Instead, it was dead silent. I waited for a couple of minutes, turned on my flashlight, and started looking around the stacks of crates for what I thought would be a giggling coworker. After searching each corner and turn, I gave up. I was a little weirded out at this point, but I just picked up the two bottles from the ground and placed it in the same crate as the first one. I turned off my flashlight and shouted at the darkness, "All right, I'm locking up. See you tomorrow." Just as I finished saying that, a crate full of bottles fell from one stack and landed 2 feet from me. Glass shards and beer exploding everywhere. The next day I told my boss about it, and he said it was probably a rat. The thing is, those crates when fully probably weighed about 20 pounds. How could a rat push it? Talking to my coworkers, they told me that they've also experienced weird stuff during closing hours. My second experience happened again when I was closing the place. This time I was closing the pub. When closing the pub, the last thing you usually do is to restock the walk-in freezer. The freezer is probably just as old as the building itself and sits underground right beneath the bar. I was down there filling that enormous thing with kegs and crates, being a very old freezer from a time when safety wasn't a big concern. The thing doesn't open from the inside. No handle, nothing. Just a flat, plain steel door. So I did what I always did when I had to go inside that thing. I put a keg securing the door open. I was halfway through the task when I hear the door slamming shut. I rush toward the door, but it's locked shut. I start pounding on it, but the only other person there was my boss in the office, 2 floors above me, probably with his door closed. I tried my phone, but since I'm locked underground inside a steel and lead box, I had no service. I was wearing only jeans and a t-shirt, so things were getting chilly pretty quickly. My face was going numb and my hands were getting stiff. I made a blanket out of cardboard, but it was doing very little keeping the cold at bay. The only reason I didn't freeze to death was because I had a date with a regular and she went there looking for me. She asked my boss where I was, and when he couldn't find me, he went to the basement and found me inside the freezer. I was there for about 45 minutes when he found me, and I was starting to consider writing a letter to my parents and drinking myself to sleep. My boss installed a chain to keep the door open after that, but I refused to ever walk in that death trap ever again. Weirdest part, the keg I had holding the door open was at the other side of the room when I got out. It was a full steel keg, not something that just slides away, let alone quietly. I stopped working there shortly after for unrelated reason. Thoughts? Me and my colleagues smelt smoke at work. So I was at work doing a late evening, probably around 7 p.m., and I started to smell smoke. Now I was work on until the computer tower that runs in the cupboard underneath. Probably it was the box of toll roll, either getting hot or beginning to burn. I opened the cupboard and moved the box, that wasn't warm, away from the tower about 6 inches. After 15 minutes, the smell was still there, and I was a little confused in all honesty. My intention was to tell my manager the next time I saw them, as there was no smoke anywhere or any signs of fire. It's also worth mentioning that none of the fire alarms were going off either. Anyway, my manager comes walking down to where I am, and before I can say anything, begins asking if I smell burning. I tell her I've smelt it the last 15 minutes and even moved the till rolls. At this, even more colleagues walk down to me saying they've smelt it in the rest of the store. Now, just to note, this building isn't small, probably 150 by 150 feet, so more of a big warehouse. For about another 15 minutes, we go around smelling everything and everywhere. Even in the cash office behind a big armored metal door, you could smell smoke, which made no sense. At this point, customers begin to say that they can smell it too, so we seriously considered evacuating. We gave the alarms a check, and nowhere registered smoke. Note, each portion of the store is split into sections. At this point, we decided there was no need, and we were all very confused, to say the least. For about another 5 minutes, a total of 35 minutes now, we all smelt it, still with some people saying it was gone in certain areas. When I went over it, it was gone. And when I came back, it was there again, where I originally was. Overall, this was a very strange experience for everyone. It's also worth noting, I know full well the building is haunted, as I've heard other things such as footsteps in the stock room when I know nobody is in there and I have to go to check. Tape that I have just placed down has flown off the desk. I've been stood near. Also, 2 other employees, one of which is still there, have seen 2 full-bodied apparitions, both at the same time, and could be seen looking in the same direction on camera, even when there was nothing there. They said they had seen a little girl and a woman in black, coincidentally right when the tape came off of the desk I work at. I mainly just wanted to know what smelling smoke means, and if it's good or bad. Did I really speak to my boyfriend's dead best friend? 2 days ago, something weird happened. My boyfriend and me have been together for about 4 months, so this is a new relationship. He told me about his family's history of being able to let spirits talk through them. Especially his older sister has instances of going off in fluent Russian and had a different voice and all. They're Dominican, and we live in a German-speaking country. He started having physical pain in his chest, wrist, his neck, and the back of his knees. His best friend died in a tragic car crash a few years ago, and ever since his death, my boyfriend gets rashes in those exact areas. So there seems to be a connection there. When his pain started, after a while he realized he had this experience with intense pain in those areas once a year, ever since his friend died. Always at the end of January, and it stops after he visits his grave. After a while, he starts struggling really badly, and he was feeling all sorts of emotion. And that they weren't his emotions, though. He even cried, and he never cries. My boyfriend couldn't remember a lot of the evening and what he said. He said it felt like a dream from the time we ate dinner to the time we had a shower. It's all very blurry to him. When he was out of it, he said he missed his mom. Right after he said that, he snapped out of it and said, "When I'm crying, it's not me." What did I just say? When I was lying there. And I told him about the mother thing because he couldn't remember it, even though it was less than a minute ago. Another time he said he wanted a cigarette. He just wanted to smoke. I gave him a cigarette, but he couldn't light it. He said the light of the fire was too bright for him. When I lit the cigarette for him, he seemed satisfied and exclaimed, "When have I smoked the last time?" In a sense, it's been ages. And said, "Thank you for letting me smoke. My boyfriend has been smoking all day." He kept repeating that it was too bright in our room, even if it was rather dark. There was a green light on and some colored bulb lights. It was really dark, actually, which leads me to believe that wherever his friend is stuck, it is really dark there, and he's not used to light anymore. Every time my boyfriend snapped back, he said he thinks his friend is hurting, feeling alone. He wants to talk to me and that he really misses his mother, but is also a bit mad because his family always doesn't keep his grave upkept. Did I really speak with him when my boyfriend was out? How did we know it was really him? Why did the experience change? So my whole life, even before I can remember, I had a strong connection with the paranormal. My parents have very convincing stories of something different with me, but they did not know what was going on, so they would ignore what I was telling them and say I was daydreaming. I feel bad because it must have been hard raising a child and having no idea what was going on. But also, I am sad that they never expected the isolation I felt from not being able to tell anyone my stories or fears that they are coming from these things. Back in 2016, I started having constant contact with all sorts of unknown entities. The frequency and consistency of certain ones became daily, to where it had for sure had a hand in ruining possibly a very good relationship. After years of me trying to figure out what's going on and why I'm having these experiences and trying to tell them to her just made me sound crazy for sure. The last heavy experience I had was 2021, and I was lucky enough. To me, driving home and my girlfriend at the time was with me in the car. Right in the middle of plain day was a small craft about the size of a boat, hovering a short distance over someone's house. To my surprise, she noticed it first, and she just said, "Slow down," and pointed. I was already slowing down, as there was the most strange of hovering craft I've ever seen. I don't have my journal for exact description, but it was very metallic and mirror-like. It had two circular orbs, the top being a ball and the bottom half teardrop shaped. The two halves were not connected, but one functioning unit. Between these two halves was shapes rotating in a ring. It had that metallic look, but it had this effect of some transparent edge, fading in and out of resolution. When it would fade out, you could see the outline of its shape, since it was already looking directly at it. It looked very close to the effect of a mirage. Now, it has been weird because there's been no real life style changes, and I've had not much experiences at all. At times of unclarity, I will use medication for guidance, but now there is no guide, or if there is, a sense of one, there is a feel of being locked out or rejected. Grandma's visit. My girlfriend had a grandmother who she was really close to growing up. In 2014, she passed away from cancer, and it took a large mental toll on my girlfriend. Her grandmother was one of the main figures in her life, providing wisdom, helping her out when she was stuck, and always looking over her to make sure she was okay. As the years passed, my girlfriend said she could always sense her grandmother was still watching over her and would appear in her dreams or manifest as a strong gut feeling. Having past experiences with the paranormal, I thought it was sweet and endearing her grandma was still watching over her in the afterlife. I didn't think much more often about it at the time. The first real sign there was more to what she was feeling came in 2019. My girlfriend's best friend and roommate at the time wanted to try Reiki, a Japanese technique to reduce stress. Together as they were, both highly stressed trying to get jobs post-graduation. During the process, my girlfriend could sense her grandmother was in the room, but couldn't see her. Later that night, the roommate had a dream of an elderly woman saying a name. In the morning, when she told my girlfriend, there was silence as the woman's description matched that of my girlfriend's grandma. This could have chalked up to seem like an old photo of them together, which my girlfriend had plenty of on her phone. The part that indicated there was more afoot was the name. It was a nickname that the grandmother would call my girlfriend when she visited. My girlfriend never told anyone the nickname. The same day, my girlfriend got a phone call from a company that concluded with her getting her job at a college. My experience with her grandma came in 2021. It was a similar story as above, where my girlfriend was trying to acquire a position that would alleviate her in her career. Her current company at the time did some major restructuring, which resulted in poorer management and toxic work environments. She was praying and asking for something to show a sign that all of her efforts would get out of the company and go someplace better were not for naught. She was on the hunt for the last 6 months and was about to give up. The night she withdrew her normal bubbly personality and was visibly upset, I told her that things do not take time, and the biggest piece was to keep pushing forward no matter how many hurdles are thrown your way. It did cheer her up, just in time to go to bed. It should be noted at this point we live in a 2-bedroom apartment on the 3rd floor with large windows in the bedroom that gets flooded with light from the city streets and surrounding buildings. There are curtains that are drawn across to prevent the light from getting in, but the occasional car headlight will peep through. As we settled into bed, my mind was plagued with an all too familiar feeling I experienced once before when I chased down an old ghost story at an old tobacco barn in my hometown. I couldn't help shake the feeling that something was watching us. I first gazed over to the window to make sure it wasn't some person that was peeking through the gaps in the blind. It was when I scanned the room that I noticed what appeared to be a shadow in the corner in the front of the door. It was like a thick black mist with no identifying features that stood there like it was standing guard. I froze briefly before convincing myself that I must be dreaming and just lay back down. In the morning, my girlfriend startled me awake by telling me she got a call from a large consulting firm looking to recruit her. She was so happy and couldn't stop dancing. I was glad she got the new role that she was asking for, but I couldn't stop thinking about what I saw right before I went to bed. I proceeded to inquire if she had any strange dreams last night, to which she responded with giddy eyes, yes. She proceeded to tell me if it was about her grandma, and her walking on a beach reminiscing about old stories, and her grandma was parting advice to her about the future. At that point, I told her what I saw, and she told me, "Oh, you saw her as well. I thought it was just my imagination." Now I know whenever my girlfriend is stuck or having a hard time, expect a visit from Grandma. Expanding on the evil entity in my dreams. I can't remember everything perfectly, but in the beginning, it told me I could do anything and that I had big potential. I would always smile and thank him in the dreams. It made me feel really good at the time, but looking back, I'm sure it was trying hard to play on my ego and get me to do the things it wanted me to do later on. Once it got malicious. It said a few specific things I could remember vividly because they were very upsetting to me. One time it was my mom standing over me, burning me with a cigarette all over my body. She was a heavy smoker. She was basically just telling me I was worthless and that she hated me and to commit suicide. I knew it was a part of this thing's agenda because that dread feeling I always got, it was a fucking horrible feeling every time I would dream about that thing. I can't stress it enough. Another time, it pretended to be a guy I was in love with at the time. I'll call him Josh. 2 Joshes walked into my apartment, and then one of them went back downstairs. I asked the remaining one if he was the real Josh. He said, everywhere. And with that, I heard a gunshot and saw a bullet hole appear in the floor at my feet. Blood splattered around the hole, and the Josh in front of me laughed. This hideous, evil laugh that I'll never forget. Again, that feeling was there. I woke up crying. That one stuck with me for a while. Another time, I began dreaming that my current boyfriend was propped up over on top of me in bed and we were kissing. After a while, he said, "I'm so glad that you're here, and I'm me." But he said it in a creepy tone of voice that insinuated that it was not my boyfriend who was on top of me. It started laughing, and then I felt my actual boyfriend turning over in the bed next to me, sleeping. That one was terrifying. Those are the most notable ones I can really remember. I was visited by something evil in my dreams. I grew up Catholic and began questioning my faith around the age of 14. It was a dark time for me, and I believe that was because I was vulnerable. Something took the opportunity to harass me, for lack of a better word. When I was 14, I started having dreams that felt different from the others. In the beginning, there was always a man. He was very handsome, tall with black hair, ice blue eyes. He was very comforting to me, and he would give me advice about specific things in my life. I looked forward to dreaming about this man. Then as I continued having these dreams, he started acting a bit differently. He would say things that made me question his motives, things that just didn't seem right, like a friend pretending to compliment you, but really making fun of you. I started getting uncomfortable with it. Eventually, he started telling me all these things to do that would help me. Things like killing people who have hurt me, or killing myself so that I can be happy. He became angry with me when I disagreed. When I would dream about him, I would always feel the same sense of deep dread and horror. It was intense fear that I would feel as soon as a dream began. And I knew he was there. In one particular dream, he chased me through the streets of what looked like a dark, gloomy city from the early 1900s. He was trying to kill me. I started saying the Lord's Prayer and woke up immediately. This is when it got really bad. I never saw him as the handsome man after this point. He took the form of people I loved and said horrible things to me. I was told how worthless I was and to kill myself. Most commonly, he was my mother saying these things. My mother was abusive and we had a very bad relationship. Each time this would happen, I would pray, and usually I would wake up. After some time, that became less effective. Every time I would pray, I felt like I was being choked or that I couldn't breathe or move my mouth. Nonetheless, I would continue waking up. All of this happened over probably 100 dreams from age 14 to 19 when I moved into my own apartment. I had one last dream there, and since then, it has stopped. I'm 21 now. I think that because I continue praying and staying confident in defending myself is less fun for whatever that thing was, and maybe it left me. I hope I never feel that feeling at the beginning of a dream again. A man disappeared in front of me in December last year. This was in the town I'm currently living in, northern Wisconsin. December last year, I scrounged up some change. I went out to get a soda at my local gas station. It was like any other day. I got dressed, went down our apartment stairs, and started my usual journey to the local holiday gas station for Pepsi. I still remember all of this clear as ever. Just as I exited our apartment and out into the alley, a man walks past me and gives me a wave. He wore a red winter jacket with a white stripe in the middle, a gray beanie and a short gray hair underneath, denim jeans and black boots. I listened to music pretty much all day, so when I switched playlists and looked back up, the man was gone, seemingly vanished. I stopped dead in my tracks, awestruck. I suck at explaining things. Yet again, I apologize. Like I said, he just straight up disappeared, literally gone like he was never there. I remember he was walking in the same direction as me, maybe a couple feet away. The snow was crumbling under his steps like anyone else. There was no car that picked him up. My immediate reaction was just to take out my earbuds and listen. Nothing. Next, I checked to see if maybe he went behind the wooden fence. Again, nothing. The gate had a padlock, and the snow from the blizzard on Christmas was there. No signs of the gate being opened and snow being pushed away. I looked for footprints in the snow. Nothing, only mine. And I knew for certain his shoe size was definitely bigger. I was in pure confusion at this point. I looked across the street, and the woman I saw walking with camouflage before a man walked past me was still there, making her way to wherever she was going. I walked in a brisk out the alley and looked both ways. The man was still nowhere to be seen. Still baffled and confused, I chucked it up to my imagination or something, joking to myself, he no-clipped into the back rooms. Once I got home, I told my mom and stepfather. Of course, they immediately jokingly saying that it was a time traveler or something, but they believed me since they experienced their own share of strange happenings in their lives. Even after days, a month after, there was no mention of a disappearance on my uncle's police scanner. Again, I apologize for my grammar and spelling. I haven't been writing in a good while, but anyone has a logical idea what happened? Sometimes I can see with my eyes closed. When I was in 8th grade, I had a problem of sleep paralysis. Whenever I went to sleep, I suffered with it. But sometimes there's something different. I mean between the stage of waking and sleeping, in half sleep. I can see with my eyes closed. I can even tell what color of bedsheet is on the bed of the next room and what is on the bed, like how many pillows or some type of other folded bedsheet or my backpack. It always started when my eyes were closed and suddenly I'm seeing the wall of another room. And then I'm in the other room checking around in my half sleep. I can see the folded bed sheet, the bed, almost all of the room, but then one black figure shows up, starts running for me. Then my mom wakes me up and I tell her all the things I remember so she can check if I'm telling the truth, and yes, I was. We went to the priests and asked them to do a ritual in our home. After the ritual, I was still getting these kind of dreams. Then the priest told me to wear a locket that he made, but I was still getting those dreams, and one night it stopped. I don't remember how, but it only occurred occasionally then suddenly. After 4 to 5 years, it started happening again yesterday. I was in my half sleep, or you can say I was awake, but not conscious. I started experiencing the same, but as we shifted our home, the scenario was different this time. I didn't wake up in my sleep. In the other room, I can see down, and then suddenly, it wasn't in my hand. I focused on it and saw some sort of snakes were pretending to be my hand. Black snakes. So many of them that I saw a face made of snakes which were moving around, and then I woke up saying, "What the fuck am I seeing?" Also, I can hear voices in my dreams. So this happened. When I was in sleep paralysis, I heard a word that was a code word for an experiment that was performed on humans in the late 90s. How I know that? Yeah, because I searched that word on Google and got an article of government about it. In that article, it explained the experiment. I was hearing a deep frequency when someone was saying the word was repeatedly, and in the article said that when we play a certain frequency, we can paint messages in a human's brain. And you know what? I even created a note. Keep notes of what words in my account. And now I can find that note or the Google history. Also, I don't remember that word. I can see with my eyes closed, part 2. I was sleeping today when I noticed that, oh no, it's happening again. I can see the wall again, but my eyes are closed. I woke up instantly, but went to sleep again now. This time I was able to see with my eyes closed, but it was a new place where I was sleeping. I couldn't move my body, my head. I was covered with a blanket, which had 2 links written on one. I remember this was the site of mischiefUSA.com. Other one I don't remember. That was also some type of link that I've never visited before. So that blanket was a green blanket, just like the army one I was covered in. But that suddenly came and removed my blanket. I wasn't able to see him because he was in my backside, but I started screaming, "Mom and Dad," which I thought was screaming. But I wasn't able to scream or even move my head or do something. No single word was coming out of my mouth. I remember I was trying to scream so loud that my mouth was wide open but couldn't speak a word. I came to know that all this was a waste of time. Then I tried to move my body, as I know if I'm able to move my body, I'll wake up. I started to lift my head. One thing that happened to me when I try to move my body in this type of dream or outer world experience is my neck shakes or vibrates so much that I can feel that it's going to break now. My neck started vibrating like I was leaving that body, my soul. I then finally woke up and asked my family, did they hear some screaming for help? They said no. I have this type of experience frequently. I remember 4 to 5 days before I had a similar type of experience that made me think that afterlife is possible. This type of dream always starts with me seeing my wall with my eyes closed while sleeping. As soon as I see the wall, I try to wake up immediately, as I know what's going to happen now. I can see the scariest things that I've never ever watched or seen in any types of movies or shows or anything. So that day, the same thing happened. I tried to wake up but failed. This time, somehow I was able to move my hand. This time was a long, long time that I was in this state for. I tried to slap myself, but I was too slow that I only touched my hand on my face. I couldn't feel the hand on my face. I rubbed my hand on my face, I couldn't feel anything. What I came to know is that our body is like our hardware. Our soul is like an operating system. When we move out, leave our body, our consciousness becomes unavailable to us. We feel that we can think or perform any action and can't store any memory in our brain. I felt like I was in a coma. My ears started ringing after I looked at a video of a friend who died of suicide. My friend gave me her phone to look at photos of her cats when they were kittens, and she told me to scroll up to find more pictures. I did, and I came across a few pictures and videos of her close friend that passed away due to suicide that Christmas. I said nothing when I saw the first photo of her, but I saw the video and said, "Oh man, I just saw the video of, I miss her." As soon as I finished my sentence, I got this ringing in my left ear, which happens on occasion randomly, but this felt a bit different. I told her about it as it was happening, and she said that she sometimes gets it too. After a few seconds, it faded out, but an overwhelming feeling of dread came over me, almost like I was about to have a panic attack. I just felt super weird for a minute and was silent for a bit. I told her how weird that I felt, and she really didn't say anything. She might have been upset because they were very close, so I don't blame her for being like that. But still, it was super weird that I've never felt anything like that before. What are your thoughts on this? Do you think it meant something, or am I just being superstitious? Also, she didn't pass away in this apartment, but my friend and her were very close, like family. Her blood family didn't treat her right, and my friend and her bonded over that. She lived in this apartment for over a year. Not sure how long. Help me make sense of this. First off, some background on myself. I'm an avid outdoorsman. I grew up in a small rural mountain town in Boise County, Idaho. Ever since I was young, I've enjoyed all that outdoors had to offer me. Starting around the age of 11, I began the hobby of backcountry land navigation. I would leave on solo excursions, sometimes lasting almost 2 weeks, in search of hidden landmarks nowhere near known or established trails. By the time I was 13, I had become an avid tracker and successful big game hunter, bagging everything from deer to bear. At 18, I joined the U.S. Navy as a CB and began training to fulfill my dream of becoming an SWYCC operator. I deployed 3 times in 2 different combat zones as a CB and decided to change gears in life after that. I currently reside in Idaho again and still enjoy the outdoors, land, nav, bushcraft, anytime I can. This story begins in June last year. Me and my family pack up the truck to go on a 5-day leisure camping trip in a remote area of Boise National Forest. The main focus of this trip was to enjoy the rainy weather in nature and enjoy some fly fishing. We approached an area that I had packed on X, a GPX-like app, as a potential home for the coming week. As I turned off the dirt road to begin the slow descent down a trail toward the river, I noticed something in a tree at the top of the trailhead. I got out of the truck to get closer and look at it. It was a hatchet sticking out of the trunk of the tree. Fairly tall, I had to stand on my truck hood to reach this hatchet and dislodge it from the tree. It was buried almost up to the handle, which I know you might think is strange, but I did not think much of it at the time. The hatchet was very strange in appearance. It appeared to have designs carved throughout it, and the blade had been cut in a sort of pattern that made it look more like a weapon than a tool. After stepping off the truck, I noticed remnants of the campsite at the top of the trail. Weird items left behind, like a single pot to cook top, fire grate, and some propane tanks. It wasn't like a complete camp, but definitely some trash and other things left behind. I cursed the previous campers and told my wife we would pack it and head home. We reached the spot I was looking for, and it was amazing. Unusually high rains had swollen the river and created an amazing spectacle, like something out of a rainforest. Trees jutted straight out of the river. We quickly found our spot that we had intended to put our tent and quickly began setting up our tent before the next spot of rain. Our tent is not a typical nylon tent. It's a canvas circle about 14 foot round, and it has a hole or a jack for a chimney flute. It's meant to house multiple people in all weather for extended periods of time. After our camp was set up and the fire was going, we noticed tucked back behind some brush and partially submerged there was a cave on the edge of our camp. It wasn't very big, maybe 4 feet tall and a few feet wide. However, it was big enough I could walk in, and if I crouched, it seemed to extend far into the mountains, and not knowing what the ground looked like under the water, I only went in about 5 or 10 feet. We decided something about the cave made us uneasy and decided to move on. That night the rain was light that first day, so we enjoyed some recreation, putting around on our old junky 4-wheeler with our son fishing and just taking in the outdoors. we began to notice that all around the area we set our camp were a bunch of bugs, which was weird because it was cooler and rainy and we had seen no bugs on the trail leading down to the meadow. It seemed like this whole meadow was infested with all sorts of bugs. We did not let it break our spirits, though. Idaho has bugs, and we often share our space with them while camping. As we started to wind down the evening and cook dinner over the fire, I couldn't help but think about the cave and the hatchet. I became overwhelmingly saddened and just had this feeling that the area I had chosen just disrespected by all other previous campers. As me and my wife enjoyed a few minutes of quiet after putting the baby to bed, we both could not stop focusing on the cave. By the time we were off to bed, the feeling of anger and sadness I had felt got more intense, and my wife vocalized the same thing. We had decided that something about the spot was just not sitting well, so we agreed we would move camp further down the trail next morning. That night I couldn't sleep. I just laid anxiously as I listened to the rain. I could hear whooping coming from the other side of the river, but quickly convinced myself it was likely a bird because it almost sounded like an owl. But the sounds would just get louder, and I could hear them all over the mountains on the other side of the river. I would hear splashing and booming like large boulders were being thrown into the river. But I quickly told myself it was just rocks tumbling, either of the hill because of the rain or the river because of the high water level. When I did finally sleep, I had a vivid dream of white and green lights floating through the trees of the forest. Not in any kind of shape, just floating from behind one tree to another. I felt angry and sad in my dream. I was abruptly awoken by the child and looked at the time, and it was early, but a nice time to get up and start the day. I shook off the previous night and tried to have a good day. That day was fairly uneventful. We abandoned the plan to move camp and decided we were just being picky. That night before we went to bed, I could hear the whooping again, except this time it sounded closer and more human than before. I ignored it and went to bed. That night I didn't sleep. My wife didn't either. We listened to the whooping as it became almost more chant-like and sporadic, like if someone was whistling back and forth to a hunting partner and locate them in a thick brush. Suddenly something hit the outside of our tent, being that it's stretched canvas and it was like throwing a stone at a drum. We both sat up and silently looked at each other, and then another hot this time on the other side. I grabbed my .44 out of my footlocker, loaded it, and held it at my side as we sat there listening. It was silent other than the rain. Then two more thuds on the outside of the tent, this time simultaneous and on opposing ends. They were much harder hits and actually shook the tent. I jumped off the unzipped tent, ran out, flashlight and gun in hand, and cleared the campsite. I could hear movement and whooping across the river, but there was nothing in camp. I looked on the wet ground for animal tracks and rocks, but there was nothing. I'm not sure why I did this, but when I went back in the tent to console the kiddo and my wife, I just told my wife that it was pine cones falling from a nearby tree. Maybe I just didn't want to freak her out. Maybe I was still rationalizing. I don't know. I did not sleep, and the rest of the night she continued to hear the whooping. The next we were all quiet, and it was very rainy, so we stayed under the cover and just relaxed. However, all throughout the day, I could hear whooping across the river, and I could also hear elk bugles. It's not common for an elk to bugle in the middle of the day or outside the rut season. Not impossible, just weird. That night we both laid awake and waited for anything weird. The whooping had stopped, the rain was gone, and it was quiet. My wife started whimpering, and I asked what was going on. She started to become hysterical, and she said she did not feel safe. She wanted to leave. And not just leave, she wanted to abandon everything and just leave. About an hour later, I calmed her down and she fell asleep. I started to hear the whooping again, but I was just so exhausted at this point I fell asleep. I had another vivid dream, or I think it was a dream. I could only move my eyes, and I watched as a wolf walked into my tent. I couldn't believe it was happening, and I tried to yell, but nothing happened. I just watched as this wolf sniffed the base of my son's neck and play. I noticed the size of this animal was unnatural. It was gigantic. It finally turned to leave the tent and I was able to move. I grabbed my pistol and stormed out. The wolf was standing right outside the camp and it immediately turned to face me. I pulled my pistol, but I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. Suddenly, like someone had kicked me in my feet. Under me, I was on my knees. Pistol still drawn on the animal, it approached me snarling and baring teeth. Its face touched my pistol, but it just continues to be closer to me. I felt compelled to lower it for whatever reason. And when I did, the wolf left. My wife woke up to me saying the tent had a leak. I was soaked, and so was the bed. Without telling my wife why, we packed our camp in record time and made the 100-mile trek home. Before we left, I took the hatchet that I now attribute some bad feelings to and hung it off a branch on the tree I pulled it from. I've never had anything like this ever happen. I do not scare easily, and I'm honestly embarrassed at how worked up I got. Regardless, I have not and will not go back to that river. Something doesn't want me there and clearly stated that. Since this trip, I have increased night terrors, sleep problems, and growing aggression. I had brought the story up to the most sane and capable outdoorsman I knew, my father-in-law, and he turned white as a ghost. He then told me a very similar story about the same area. He hasn't been back there since that incident. I still get outside and do all that I love, but this incident isolated as it has stuck with me. After a couple months had passed, me and the wife decided to seek counseling for the issues that have stuck with us. The brain doc thinks high stress of toddler, sleep deprivation, and the mind's natural mechanisms to associate discomfort with external things are the answer to our trip. I don't truly know what the answer is, but fuck that place and I will not be going back. Lately I can't sleep and I have recurring dreams about a pale white woman described in my dreams as a witch. I'm trying to make sense of this and I'm scared. Ask Reddit 1. When I was a little kid, my family moved to the hills of West Virginia and lived in a small house that was built in the 1920s. I hated this house, specifically my room. How my room was set up was that my bed was in the corner and my closet was directly across from my bed. Facing the closet to the right was a doorway with no door leading into a playroom. The door to leave my room was to the left of my closet on the wall that the bed was on. Every night I sat there staring at the closet door. My dog, who is a bigger husky, Shepherd Mutt, would lay on the door whining to get out of my room as I made her stay with me, which she never did in any other room, even when she needed to go outside. My fearless dog hated being in my room. After a while, the fear didn't get any better. I would beg my parents to let me stay at my grandparents' house, which was next door, or for my dad to stay in the room with me until I fell asleep. I had never had any trouble going to sleep on my own, so my parents thought it was just this way of getting attention or something. Well, one night, all of this fear and everything else came to my head. I was lying in my bed, pillows stacked up, so I wouldn't have to see my closet door, hiding under the covers. I heard my dog yelp. This being odd, I peeked out of the covers, saw nothing. As soon as I laid back down, I heard the handle fall off my old closet door. The handle falling off wasn't something new, as it was only a front knob and the rod was found on the floor quite frequently. No one thought a thing of it, would just pick it up, place it back in the hole. When I heard the knob fall, I terrifyingly looked over, and no one nor I'd ever actually seen it fall before. Since the door was old, the knob kept the mechanism latched so the door wouldn't open. Since the knob was out, the door creaked open like a horror movie. At this point, I was so scared I couldn't move or scream or do anything. My dog at this point of the whining very loud. but not loud enough for my parents in their room to hear. They then just stopped. I looked at the open closet door and saw a small, frail boy with a very large head. All of him was black except for where his eyes should be. He slowly turned and looked at me, and I didn't feel fear. I felt devastation. I felt the most extreme anger and sadness and intense emotions I've ever felt. It wasn't natural. After what seemed like forever, I bolted out of my room, sobbing, and ran to my parents. My parents never let me sleep with them, so my father took me back to bed and waited until I fell asleep. From then on, I would throw actual fits if I wasn't allowed to stay the night at my grandparents'. On nights I had to stay home, this same experience would happen every single night. I wouldn't sleep if I stayed at my house. My parents gave in and let me stay with my grandparents most nights. It got to the point where my mom was telling my godmother what was happening, and she offered to bless the room as she was a devout Catholic. After this, things got better for about a week, and then all collapsed into the same horror show every night. My parents aren't very religious, but eventually decided to test it out for themselves. My mother stayed in my room one night and decided that we needed to move the next day. I've never seen that little boy again, but the thought of it brings me to tears. I don't know what it was. I believe in the supernatural. It's kind of hard for me not to. I wasn't the only one to be experiencing this in my old house, and it wasn't tested for any kind of leaks or slow poisoning. And it was clear after selling it, we found out that people that lived there refused to use that room, which I found interesting because they never knew what had happened. I was terrorized every night by a little ghost boy who was a dark shadow with a large head, translucent glowing eyes. After months, my parents finally believed me, and we moved out after a blessing did seemingly nothing.